guys, welcome back to my channel. It is Christian here. Thank you so much for joining me today. So I am back. I am feeling energized. I am feeling really good to be back and sitting down and filming with you guys today. So today what we're going to be doing is just kind of like a simple video. It's going to be like a roundup of some of the eyeshadow palettes that I have really been enjoying over the year of 2018. We have 4 months left in the year. I was planning on doing this video last month or the month before, but you guys kind of know that I took my hiatus. But I'm going to be talking about all of my favorite eyeshadows up until today that have kind of stood out to me, that I've been excited about, and that I have been using and that have been in constant rotation since I picked them up. So it's going to be probably about 5 or 6 different eyeshadow palettes. I'm going to explain to you why I like them. So eyeshadows are like my weakness. Eyeshadow palettes are like my weakness. I cannot stop myself. I will buy the same eyeshadow 57 million times the way most of us do. But I tried to pick some eyeshadows that were a little bit, or some palettes that were a little bit different, that stood out a little bit more to me. And I'm going to go ahead and, like I mentioned, give you all of the reasons why I like them, price points and things like that, and who I think that they would be good for, whether or not you have a very extensive collection or you are looking for your first eyeshadow palette. But for right now, I just wanted to keep it very specific to palettes that were released into 2018 that I have been loving. So if you're interested in some reviews on things that I have hauled that kind of disappeared and you never heard about again, then this is going to be the video for you. So yeah, you guys, let's go ahead and get started with some of my favorite eyeshadow palettes of 2018. So the first palette that I'm going to start with is an Anastasia palette. It is the Anastasia Soft Glam palette. It does retail for $42. It can be purchased at several locations like Macy's, Sephora, Ulta, Anastasia's website, and anywhere else that Anastasia Beverly Hills is sold. This is not a limited edition palette. This is a permanent palette in their collection. It does have, lost the brush. It does have the standard layout of pretty much all Anastasia Beverly Hills palettes. You do get 17. You do get 14 different eyeshadows. You are in this palette getting a mixture of a little bit of shimmers, and you are getting a little bit, you're getting some shimmers and some mattes. So you are getting 5 more metallic-y, shimmery type shades, and then the rest in this palette are going to be matte. So let me go ahead and get what some people might consider negatives out of the way first. So a couple of the negatives are 7 of the eyeshadows, if I remember correctly, 7 of the eyeshadows that are in this palette are already existing in Anastasia's range. So if you own all of her palettes, or if you own a bunch of her singles like I do, then this palette is going to definitely have a lot of repeat shades. That in the beginning is why I was not going to purchase this particular eyeshadow palette, because I was like, I already have those shades, I don't need the palette. But the more I looked at it, the more I thought about it, the more I got excited about this palette, and I decided to go ahead and pick it up. So we're going to go ahead and mention another negative. I know that this is my favorites, but I always like to play devil's advocate of the good and the bad. So another negative, or something else that some people might complain about or kind of say, you know, this palette is a little bit boring and it's a little bit on the basic side. But here's the thing, not everybody has extensive eyeshadow collections. Not everybody has that neutral eyeshadow palette. So, and I do believe that every brand needs that staple basic eyeshadow palette. And I think for Anastasia Beverly Hills, this is it. Of course, Modern Renaissance is like most people's holy grails, but the Modern Renaissance has a lot more deeper burgundy, red, rusty shades, pinky shades, whereas this one is like a true neutral palette. So I think that if you're going to buy your first eyeshadow palette, I definitely think that this is a palette that you can definitely get a lot of different looks out of. And if you are not necessarily a neutral girl, but you just want a palette that you know is going to work every single time, this is going to be the palette for you. The reason why I like this palette is because it's very neutral, it's very pigmented, it's very buttery smooth. Now, one thing about Anastasia palettes, of course, is she does pick up her eyeshadows do pick up a lot of dust, but they are very blendable. They are very easy to use. With the exception of her Prism palette and her Subculture palette, I think that those for a lot of people were very miss. But this palette is a little bit more true to her original formula. They blend easy, they're super pigmented, they have just a lot of depth to her eyeshadows. So like you can look at the palette, you can look at this palette and think, oh, well, I have those colors a million times. And again, if you own Anastasia palettes, you probably do. But if this is the first Anastasia palette that you're looking to get, then you'd be surprised by how rich and how different some of her colors actually are. Like her mattes just, they work. I mean, the metallics in here, They are smooth, so they're not really shimmer shades. They're more metallics. I think I said it wrong in the beginning. They are more metallic because to me, shimmer shades typically have a little bit of glitter or a little bit more fallout, and they kind of sparkle on the eye. And shimmer shadows sometimes don't look as good on older eyes or people that have hooded eyes or even necessarily smaller eyes. But a nice high shine metallic that doesn't have that glitter built into the base of the shadow is gonna look beautiful on a bunch of different skin tones. Of course, when you go a little bit more satiny, if you even are daring enough to put it in the crease, you definitely can. This palette just has staple colors that in my opinion would work for any time of year. So this palette is a little bit of a neutral palette, but there are not very many. It's pretty neutral, and it does have a couple of cool tone shades in here as well, which I do like. So you do get your cool tone and you do get a mix of, you know, your cool tones, a couple of warm tones, and a couple of neutrals. I think that this palette was executed really well. Anytime I wear this palette, my makeup always looks really great. The pigment lasts for days. And overall, I just think it's a staple product. I think that every brand, I don't care how people feel about neutral palettes now. I know people are sick of them, and I think people are tired of them. But just from a good branding and market standpoint, I think that every single brand needs to have a palette like this in their collection. And I do think that it's something that Anastasia Beverly Hills was missing. So I do think it was very smart for her to add this to her collection. It does come with the staple black, so no matter how light you want to take the look, no matter how deep you want to take the look, you can pretty much get it there. Cypress Umber is one of my favorite shades in the Modern Renaissance palette. It's one of the shades that I hit pan on. It's a super dark, rich brown that can take your look really far. Sienna is another one of those colors that is just absolutely a staple in Anastasia's collection. It works so beautifully in the crease. Oh my gosh, if you want a really warm, beautiful eyeshadow look, Sienna is always going to be the way to go. Orange Soda is a really good transition shade in her existing collection, and it's a really good shade to blend out some of the deeper colors, nice and soft. What else? Dusty Rose is also an existing shade in her collection as well, and I'm sure I'm missing a couple more. There's a couple more existing shades. But the reasons why, again, I mean, it's just a good staple palette. I think that Anastasia Beverly Hills is one of those brands that cannot, or that does not do things wrong very often. And when she does, we typically get super shocked and we're just typically like, what? How did that happen? But all in all, it's a pretty consistent brand, and she releases some really amazing eyeshadows, eyeshadow singles, just eyeshadows in general. But I will again put that disclaimer out there. If you don't like shadows that kick up a little bit more dust, then you might not like her eyeshadow palettes. Subculture got a lot of heat, but most of Anastasia's Beverly Hills palettes do have that dusty kind of layer to them. You don't need to pick up very much on your brush. You just need to dip in there maybe one time, blend it out, and you will be good to go. That is a staple eyeshadow palette in a beginner's collection. That is just a staple eyeshadow palette. Do I have similar palettes to it in my collection? Yes, but do I like Anastasia's formulation? Do I see myself reaching for it a ton so far? Yes, I haven't even put it in the desk behind me since I've purchased it. I've kept it up here with my everyday more makeup eyeshadow palettes and things like that, and I do really thoroughly enjoy that palette. The next palette that I am going to be talking about is, I'm actually kind of shocked that I do like this palette. I actually picked it up on recommendation of Puffin's wife. I think she recently changed her channel name though, but I picked this palette up because of her. I saw the packaging and I thought it was beautiful, but I was originally going to skip over this particular palette. This is the Tarte Aspyn Ovard eyeshadow palette. The packaging on it, first of all, is actually really beautiful. It is very substantial, and that's one thing that I will say that I will give Tarte credit for. They always have very nice, very substantial, very good quality packaging, and I'm a girl who can get behind some really beautiful packaging. I'm not sure if this palette is still available. I'm sorry if it's not available anymore. But I did want to mention it because it is a palette that I have really been enjoying and reaching for a ton in 2018. This palette retails, I believe it was for $39, and it was available at Ulta and on Tarte's website. I don't see it on Ulta's website anymore, but about 3 to 4 weeks ago, I was on Tarte's website and I noticed that it was still in stock on Tarte's website. Again, it does retail for $39. You do get 2 face products, which is a blush and a highlighter, and then you get 9 eyeshadows. Now these eyeshadows are definitely going to lean a little bit more on the cool tone side, so you can definitely see there are a couple of cool tone shades in here. I mean, there is 1 or 2 warm shades mixed in as well. Every time that I have worn this particular palette, the look has gone definitely a little bit more on the cool tone, especially if you put this shade High School Sweetheart in the crease. Now when you look at this, and again, I had the exact same reaction as you're probably having right now. That is like every other Tarte palette that has ever existed since the beginning of time. And you're not wrong. But the difference is most of Tarte's eyeshadow palettes are very neutrally warm. This one leans, again, a little bit more on the cooler side. You can never go wrong with Tarte blushes. Tarte blushes are absolutely beautiful. They wear really well. They have the right amount of pigmentation and they look beautiful on the skin. The highlighter in this palette, I have definitely used it a couple times. It is not my absolute favorite highlighter, but if you want to take the time to kind of blend it out into the cheekbones and get rid of a little bit of that glittery overlay that it has, it can be beautiful. Now, this particular palette has 3 different more metallic or shimmers. I would definitely call these 2 right here in the corner a little bit more of a subtle shimmer, and then the one in the center right here is more of a chunky, full-on metallic. This one is going to be a little bit more similar to those metallic-y chunky shades that are in the Anastasia eyeshadow palette. Now again, this does not, you can look at this and see that this is not going to give you a lot of depth. It's not going to give you a lot of dimension. And I know that everything I'm saying doesn't exactly sound positive, but the reason why I like this eyeshadow palette and the reason why I reach for it so much is because it is a little bit more different than the eyeshadow palettes that I have in my collection. Because anytime I pull an eyeshadow palette out of my collection, most of them, except for 2 that I'm going to show you right now, are going to give me a warm crease and it's going to be a warm crease, brown, smoky eye type situation. And anytime I have worn this palette, I have always gotten a more cool tone look. And every time I use this palette, it's always a little bit different in the sense of it's not normally what I have on my eyes. So I'm always kind of like, wow, I actually really like that. So anytime I want to reach for a more of a cool tone look, or anytime that I want to reach for a palette that doesn't require any thought or a lot of effort whatsoever. Again, I know that that sounds so bad. I reach for this palette because I can do a complete eye look with this palette in like 5 minutes because the shadows blend pretty easily. And because it's a pretty basic eyeshadow palette, you don't have to worry about, well, is this color going to go with this? Is that color going to go with that? You can kind of pair any colors together in this palette and you know that you're going to get a very cohesive look. Whereas maybe a couple of the other palettes I might show, you have to maybe take another minute or 2 to kind of sit down and think about it and think, well, if I put this in the crease, what lid shade will look better, or can I put a fun pop of color on underneath the lower lash line? So that is why I like this palette. I think that Tarte has good formulation of eyeshadows. I think that they're pretty good. I think that they work really well. And I think that, yes, they are boring. And yes, I know that people aren't excited about them anymore. But this is a palette that I've reached for a ton. I hauled it. I'm updating you right now, letting you know that I actually genuinely like this palette. And I think that Tarte should definitely come out with something that leans a little bit more cool tone, because fully cool tone, because I think that it could potentially kind of put their brand back on the map. People might get excited about them again because this palette actually was executed really, really well in comparison to eyeshadow palettes and YouTuber collaborations. I definitely think that this palette, in my opinion, was better than Bunny's palette as far as execution and as far as how well the shadows blend and how they work. So I enjoyed this palette. So I think that this particular brand knocked it out of the park, like home run, slam dunk, touchdown type situation. I don't watch sports. I should not make any type of sports analogies. But the Urban Decay Born to Run palette, holy bejesus, like, I am an Urban Decay fan through and through. I have a large attachment to Urban Decay. Urban Decay was the first high-end non-MAC eyeshadow palette that I ever bought. Their highlighters, their blushes, I was very pro Urban Decay. And when they released this palette, I kind of was like, nope, not for me. I don't need it, don't want it. And then I asked some of you guys in a video and y'all were like, yes, do it. So I did, and I'm so glad that I did, because I think that this is one of the better eyeshadow palettes that Urban Decay has put out in a while. I am a fan of the Urban Decay Naked collection, but I know a lot of people actually don't like Urban Decay shadows. But I think that they did this palette, especially in the Urban Decay lineup, is very, very special. Now, a lot of people like the packaging. I'm kind of so-so on the packaging. I don't love it. I don't hate it. This palette does retail for $49, and I do believe that it can be purchased anywhere Urban Decay is sold. I do believe you can get this at Ulta, Sephora. I'm pretty positive on that. It does come with 21 different shades. It does have a mixture of matte, shimmers, metallics, and it does mostly lean, as you can tell, very warm tone. Now, the first thing that I like about this palette, say, from any of the other Urban Decay palettes or even the Naked series, because the Naked series, whether it be the Naked 1, 2, 3, Smoky, Naked Heat, or whatever the case may be, or even now this new Naked Cherry, they take a color scheme, one specific color scheme, and they kind of stick with that throughout the entire palette. So they'll do darker versions of that burgundy or that orange, or, you know, some lighter versions. The palettes are always very cohesive, but it's a very specific color story, so you're not going to get too many different options out of that palette. The Naked Heat is always going to be a warm tone, more orangey brown type of situation, whereas a palette like this, you can take, you know, in a couple of different directions. You can take it very, very light and neutral. You can get a couple of pops of color, and I know that the pops of color, they're a little bit on the more muted side, but they are still there. So of course you have that beautiful orange that I just absolutely love. I think I loved it before like it got super popular. If you go back, I think I was filming YouTube videos at that time. It was the Kat Von D Monarch palette, and the whole reason I purchased that palette is because of that rusty burnt orange. So I've always been a fan of the rusty burnt orange shadows, even before they were super, super popular. And I think it's funny because Kat Von D, I feel like, was one of the first to, I'm getting off on one of my tangents like you know that I always do. Kat Von D, I feel like, was one of the first who really released that warm brown orangey palette, and she didn't really get like a lot of recognition on that palette. Anyways, back to this guy. So I feel like they changed the formulation of these eyeshadows based off of the Urban Decay Naked palettes a lot. I've never been a big fan of like the Urban Decay 8 shadow eye palettes anyway. I've never really purchased any of those to begin with. But what I like about this palette is it's very universal, and it's very wearable. Like the entire premise behind this eyeshadow palette is this is all you would ever need. Like you can just take this eyeshadow palette on a trip around the world for however long, and you can get different looks probably every single day. The first two palettes that I showed you, you probably would get after maybe a week worth of trying new things. It would probably all start to look a little bit the same-ish after a while, whereas this palette, I feel like you can do something different every single day and not repeat a look once. And that's why I think that this palette is super special and super beautiful. Another reason that I like this palette is because you do have your lighter transition shades, but then you also have your deeper transition shades if you have a little bit of a darker skin tone. A negative about the Tarte palette that I kind of glazed over and didn't mention, but I'm mentioning it now. This palette is not going to be very good for anybody who has a deeper, darker skin tone, whereas this palette is going to show up. This palette is going to have that nice saturation for a deeper, darker skin tone, and somebody who is a little bit of a fairer skin tone is going to have the appropriate you know, transition shades, deepening shades, and the colors are going to pop and look vibrant. And I think that that's very, very, very important. I like the fact that they took a moment to think, okay, if I was going to make the perfect eyeshadow palette, what would I do? And I think that they hit every basis for every makeup lover out there. You know, you got, you know, your copper eyelid people, you know, which I'm a proud member of. You've got us covered up here. People who like more of brown or black smoky eyes, y'all are covered down here. People who want a little bit of a pop of color, but you still want to keep it safe. Purple is always a good way to go underneath the lower lash line. You have your more greens that you can play down or play up, get them very dark, very vampy. or you can keep them a little bit more on the subtle side depending on what matte shades that you kind of lay in the crease. I think that you have every single staple color that you could possibly ever need. If you want to do a purple smoky eye, boom, it's done for you right here. If you want to do your basic just brown all matte look, it's here. Any look that you can possibly think of achieving in this palette, it's here. I mean, y'all can probably put stuff in the comments to prove me like 100% wrong on that statement, but you know what I mean when I say it. So I think that they swatch beautifully. They feel substantial. I feel like the mattes are impressive. Now the mattes do feel a little bit more dry, but that's perfectly fine. I don't get a lot of kickback in the pan with these eyeshadow palettes, which doesn't really bother me personally anyway. The one thing that I wish, and this is just my personal opinion, one thing that I would have done to make this palette a little bit different, there is a huge difference between these three brown shades depending on how you want to pair them. So I wish that they maybe got rid of one of the browns in here, or the deeper darker browns, and put a little bit more of a mid-tone brown. But this brown up here is a little bit more cool tone. So if you took that away and you wanted to go for a little bit more of a cool tone look, then you wouldn't have that option if they took that particular brown away. So that's just something that would make my version of this palette a little bit better, but I understand why they did what they did. This, if you are not a fan of Urban Decay and you were on the fence about this and you've heard all of the good reviews about this particular palette, they are all true, they are all real, it is real life. They knocked it out of the park with this palette. I thoroughly enjoy it. Now the next palette that I do want to talk about, it does definitely come from a more controversial brand, and I know that some people don't support the brand or the brand owner, but I've always been very curious about the brand and I've always wanted to try their products. I just never wanted to buy it directly from the website. But now that it's sold at Ulta, I felt a little bit more comfortable trying out the brand, and I have to admit, I do actually really like the next eyeshadow palette that I'm going to mention. The palette that I am talking about is the Lime Crime Venus XL palette. This can be purchased on Ulta or directly off of the Lime Crime website. Of course, I 100% recommend purchasing it off of the Ulta website. I would not myself purchase directly from the Lime Crime website, but this is a nice palette, you guys. I was thoroughly impressed by this palette, and I know that it's a brand that it's a little like taboo and you shouldn't talk about it, but you know what, I'm gonna be real and I'm gonna be honest, and if I like something, I like it, and I'm here to let you guys know. Now this does come with 18 different eyeshadows, and it does retail for $56, I believe. Now if I remember correctly, this palette came out around the same time as the Jeffree Star Cosmetics Blood Sugar palette, and I definitely do think that this palette was overshadowed by the Blood Sugar palette. It is more on the modern renaissance-y aspect of the realm, so you're definitely going to get a little bit more of those more rusty shades in here, as well as a little bit more of your pinky purpley vibe as well. So I do feel like this palette is a little bit more of a specific palette to purchase, whereas the Urban Decay Naked or the Urban Decay Born to Run palette, I think that no matter what your tastes are, you can probably enjoy that palette. I think that with this palette, you definitely have to want something that's going to lean a little bit more purpley, pinky, mauve-ish, because every time I've worn a look with this particular palette, it has always come out very purple or pink, and I know that some people don't like those particular looks on their eye, because with the exception of these two shades, everything in here is going to be, even the matte shades are going to lean pinks or purples or burgundies or in that kind of realm. So there's not a lot of options if you wanted to do, say, a brown smoky eye. This is not the palette that you would buy, because even this brown shade right here has a hint of more of a purple base. So when you surround it around other like purpley colors, it's really gonna intensify that particular look. You guys know that I love a purple eye, so this palette I thoroughly enjoy. It does have, again, it's really nice for summer because you're gonna get a little bit more of those vibrant neon shades right here, like the shade Flora, but it's gonna be a little bit more on the muted side, whereas take the Jeffree Star Thirsty palette, which is another palette that I also purchased and do enjoy. This one is going to be a little bit more of a muted down version. Now these shades are a little bit more of a drier consistency, especially the mattes. So when you put your finger in, you're going to be kind of like, no. But they blend really nicely on the eye. They don't skip, they don't patch. And I think that this palette is a very cohesive, well put together palette. And it is an extension of their original Venus palette, which was released probably 5-6 years ago. And that was before I think that Lime Crime kind of really got boycotted on YouTube, because I know a lot of people talked about and loved that palette. My favorite shades in this palette are New Classic. It's a stunning color. So New Classic I thoroughly enjoy. I also really like the shade Love. And then I also just really like, you know, the shade Goddess as my transition shade. You can put this shade Scallop if you want to deepen it up a little bit, but not too much. Or I'm sorry, the Scallop is a really good transition shade. Goddess if you want to deepen it up. And if you want to go in with more of a pinky eye, you can do Eden. If you want to go in with something a little bit more on the purpley side, well, you can pretty much pick anything in here. The negative side to this palette, and it's not really a negative, sometimes I love wearing this palette. I reach for it quite a bit, but I don't like necessarily wearing it to work, because I think that anytime that I wear this, I get a very like pink, blown out, more of like smoky eye or something that's super intensely purple. And for work, sometimes I'm kind of like, is this appropriate? But then I just continue to be my best self and I do it anyway. They have a couple of shades in here which I'm not a big fan of, which are Fresca and Celestial, because I'm not really a big fan of matte bases with shimmer in them. To me, I'm kind of like, I always feel like those shades are kind of like a little bit like pointless, because when you put them on the eye, they're gonna blend out into a matte anyway. So I'm kind of like, what's the point of the glitter? Unless you wanted to put it all over the lid with the glitter glue and then kind of pat it on, then you might get a little bit of that glitter reflex. But just all in all, I was impressed by this palette, you guys. Every time I've worn it, the looks have come out nice. It's very easy of use. And this is another palette that I feel like you can look at and just kind of, a look is just gonna work no matter what you pair together. It's gonna look nice and it's gonna work, because the undertones on these shadows are all very similar. They're all very pinky, purpley based. So even if you take this, you know, brown, this brown, and you want to throw this dark purple in your crease or your outer V a little bit, it's gonna work, because the browns have, well, this one not really, but this one definitely, the browns have that purple base to them. And then of course, it's just, I don't know, it's just an all-around really nice palette for fall. I was impressed by the formulation. It's not my favorite palette when it's not my favorite formulation when it comes to like mattes and shimmers. I definitely think there are better mattes on the market. To be honest, none of these palettes are my favorite when it comes to mattes. I think that Natasha Denona and Pat McGrath do mattes extremely well. And Anastasia does matte shadows pretty well as well. Anyways, so I think that this palette overall is really nice. I will have up close swatches in this video as well, so you guys can kind of see what they look like. I think that if you're interested in Lime Crime and you wanted to give it a shot, I definitely think that this is a good way to go. I was going to mention 6 palettes, but this video has already gotten pretty long. I'm already over the 30-minute mark, and talking about 2 more palettes, this would end up being a 45-minute video. So I can do a part 2 or a part 3 or whatever the case may be, or I can just do a favorites video, whatever you guys want me to do. But I just wanted to go ahead and mention some products that I have purchased and let you guys know what I have thought about them. So these have definitely been some of my favorite palettes of 2018, and there are a couple of more. Maybe I will do a part 2, and the part 2 won't be as long. But yeah, anyways, you guys, I really hope that you did enjoy this video. I really hope that you find it helpful or useful. If you were on the fence about any of these particular eyeshadow palettes, I definitely think that they are winners and they are worth taking a look at. So yeah, you guys, thank you so much for joining me. I really hope that you did enjoy this video. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe down below, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, guys.